Well, hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Danny Lichtenfeld, Director of the Brattleboro Museum. It's my great pleasure to be your host for this evening's conversation with Rio Cortez, Daniel Minter, and Javaka Steptoe, whose work, little bits of whose work you were just seeing scrolling as you joined. This is the third event in a series that we're presenting this spring in connection with the exhibit Children of the Sun, which opened at the Brattleboro Museum on March 18th and is on view through June 13th. The exhibit features artwork by Jennifer Mack Watkins and a poem by Fahemi Shakur, and it was curated by David Rios Ferreira. It's Jennifer's first solo museum show, and all of us at the Brattleboro Museum feel very grateful and privileged to have this opportunity to share Jennifer's wonderful work with our community and beyond. In just a moment, I'm going to ask Rio and Daniel and Javaka to join me on screen. The plan is for them to talk for about 45 minutes or so, and then we will open it up to your questions and comments. To submit a question or comment, if you're here on Zoom, please use the Q&A button on your screen, which is different than the chat button and a little easier for us to keep track of when you type your comment or question into the chat button. You can submit your questions or comments at any time during the talk, but we're going to wait till the end to get to them. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you can also type your questions or comments there, and we'll keep an eye on that too. Okay, with that out of the way, I'd like to ask Rio and Daniel and Javaka to turn on their cameras and microphones now. And while they're doing that, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about each of them. Rio Cortez is the New York Times bestselling author of The ABCs of Black History and I Have Learned to Define a Field as a Space Between Mountains. She's a Pushcart nominated poet who's received numerous fellowships, prizes, and grants. Born and raised in Salt Lake City, Rio now lives, writes, and works in Harlem. Daniel Minter is an artist known for his work in the mediums of painting and assemblage. Daniel has illustrated over a dozen children's books, including Going Down Home with Daddy, which won a 2020 Caldecott honor. He was also commissioned in both 2004 and 2004 and 2011 to create Kwanzaa stamps for the U.S. Postal Service. Javaka Steptoe is an artist, designer, and illustrator based in New York. His debut picture book, In Daddy's Arms, I Am Tall, won the 1998 Coretta Scott King Illustrator Award. And his Radiant Child, the story of young artist Jean-Michel Basquiat, won the 2017 Caldecott Medal. Rio, Daniel, Javaka, thank you all so much for being here. It's so nice to see you.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely.
So before we jump into the conversation, I just want to mention that the images that were scrolling in the slideshow as we were getting underway were from Rio's The ABCs of Black History. And then there were images from 3 of Daniel Minter's books, Ellen's Broom, Going Down Home with Daddy, and The Women Who Fought the Babies. And finally, there were images from 2 of Javaka's books. There was one image from Jimmy Sounds Like a Rainbow, and the others were from Radiant Child, the story of young artist Jean-Michel Basquiat. We did that because we thought it would be helpful for those of you who may not be familiar with their work to have at least a little bit of visual context for the conversation we're about to have. So, Rio, Daniel, Javaka, you are all artists whose practices encompass a variety of mediums and genres, not just children's literature. So why don't we start by having each of you tell us how children's literature fits into the bigger picture of your artistic practice as a whole. Rio, do you want to get us underway, and then I'll go to Daniel and Javaka?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'm a little newer to children's literature, actually. My life and the way that I've studied has been in poetry. So I think of myself really as a person who writes poetry or a poet. And children's literature has fit in that as a buyer, formerly for the Schomburgs Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, I would buy children's books. And I've worked in children's publishing, and with the birth of my own daughter, I think I started to see, and this is shame on me for the first time, but poetry reflected really naturally in picture books. And so it felt like a really organic step for me to start thinking about poetry in that way also, sort of like through her eyes. And that's how it's connected for me. But this is my first time writing literature for children. I think there's a lot, the more I read and the more I discover children's literature through her and through my own profession, the more poetry I encounter in it. And so that has been really exciting and has felt like a real natural extension of poetic works.
Cool. Well, congratulations on your entree into that world of children's literature. Do you expect you'll do more?
Yeah, I have 2 more picture books that are on the horizon. One is written and one is not written, but they're also poems. So, yeah.
Great. Daniel, how about you? How does children's literature fit into your life as an artist?
Well, I don't illustrate a lot of children's books, but I enjoy illustrating the ones that I do. And as an artist that works in a narrative style, I consider myself a storyteller. And within that framework, I like to represent in my stories the things that are familiar to me, which is my family, my community, and the things around me, the ways that I navigate through the world. And so the children's book turns out to be an excellent way of just telling stories. It fits in with my idea of viewing myself as a storyteller, as a narrative artist.
And are there ways in which you approach the artwork that you make for children's books differently than the other artwork that you make?
It's very different in a way. Simply, one of the reasons it's different is that it's led by a story. I don't usually write the stories, and the story leads. The story is the reason for the work existing, and so I concentrate on that, on telling that story with the images. But while doing that, I also work to insert myself into that story. I try to put myself into the story. I try to use lots of cultural references within the work. I try to make it a story that I can see myself in.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. Thank you. Javaka, children's literature has been part of your life probably for your entire life, if I understand. How does it fit into your world and your practice as an artist?
Well, okay. So I guess first of all, just to for those who might not know my history, I grew up and my father wrote and illustrated children's books, and so I grew up watching him create stories as well as creating the illustrations for the stories that he would create, or he would do research and make into books. And so as a child growing up and under those circumstances, my goal wasn't necessarily to be a children's book artist, but it was just the joy of drawing, the joy of creating, the joy of making sculpture, bending clay or whatever the medium happened to be, at that particular time. And I think one of the things that happens with me a lot is just like the exploration of materials. So I just like to see what can certain materials do. And that goes with words as well as, you know, materials like paint or wood or anything like that. And then I just think about activities, you know, like how does this story, this artwork come off the page and enter into someone's life? You know, like what can it inspire them to do, inspire them to be? And yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I assume for each of you that there were books that made a lasting impression on you when you were kids. I'm wondering if you'd just be willing to tell us about one or two of those, and also whether any of them continue to influence you today. Daniel, why don't we start with you? And I'd also just like to invite all three of you to jump in at any point and respond to each other, you know, whenever you'd like. Happy to have a really just free conversation here.
Yeah. You know, unlike Javaka, I grew up in a place where there were not a lot of children's books that had images where I could see myself. There were, matter of fact, I can't really remember any. Well, the ones that I do remember, you know, are not flattering and are more likely damaging. So the books that I do remember having a great influence on me were not really children's books, but they were short stories, a collection of short stories from Harlem Renaissance writers that I came across at a really young age. I was really fascinated by it. It had stories, you know, by Arnabon Tomes, Langston Hughes, and one by Zora Neale Hurston stood out to me because of the dialect that it was written. I felt like it was the first time that I had seen written language in the way that the people around me talked. So even, you know, and even though it's not the way that I knew it was not proper English, but I could see I could see myself in that language. I could feel the way the people spoke, and it was the way that I spoke. So that left a huge impression on me. You know, the works of Zora Neale Hurston, and that matter of fact, it's definitely is still with me today.
Thank you. Javaka, how about you? Books from when you were a kid?
So Ferdinand the Bull, Why Do Mosquitoes Buzz in People's Ears? Narnia Chronicles. So and then also I think the Tar Baby, I forgot the official name of the book, but it's the one where I think Brer Rabbit
and Tar Baby.
Yeah.
plays it. So in terms of Ferdinand the Bull, I guess to a lot of people, I live in my own universe. And like I have my own rules about how things should happen, and they don't necessarily conform with everybody else's rules. And so what makes Ferdinand the Bull so appealing is that he kind of seems to live in his own universe and in his own has his own rules. And even though he's like this large strapping bull that, you know, would look very good in the arena, that's not what he's interested in. And so he figures out a way to continue to live in his world despite what everybody else in the world thinks. And so there are times, you know, where other people have suggestions and things that are, you know, important and I should listen to. But I think for the things that really count, you know, like following your heart is what you should be doing.
Fantastic. Loved Ferdinand the Bull. Rio, how about you?
Yeah, I think like Daniel, I didn't, I just didn't grow up in a house with a lot of books. A lovely, wonderful family around me, but it just wasn't a house with a lot of books. And so when I tried to think about that, I read, for me as a kid, Angelina Ballerina, which was about a mouse. And I don't remember seeing myself reflected, certainly as a Black child, in literature when I was young, but I read Where the Wild Things Are. So I think I also first encountered a lot of writing and books through movies. And so I always think about John Singleton. When I was about 8 or 9, John Singleton was released Poetic Justice. And so what I took from that was that I wanted to read more Maya Angelou poems. And so when I was around that age, I started reading Maya Angelou poems, and that led me to some other poets like Langston Hughes that were friendly for my age group, or some of their work I could find accessible or be inspired by. And so that, and then Sister Act 2, which is another film, but this is where I found my books, was through TV and film. There's a scene where Whoopi Goldberg advises like a young Lauryn Hill to read letters to a young poet. And so I remember I won this like poetry prize in the 2nd grade, and the prize was Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. And I asked instead to swap it at my local Barnes & Noble for Rilke's Letter to a Young Poet, which was completely beyond what I was able to think about then, but it made me think about poetry. So I think of those films, and I think of John Singleton as making me first think about writing poetry. But yeah.
Wow. Coming to books through TV and film, and from a childhood where like books weren't a huge part of life, what an interesting path to becoming a poet, and that's amazing.
You know, Rio, I think that even though there were not a lot of books, I'm sure there were lots of stories and a lot of oral sharing of stories and lore all around you, and you were probably, you know, just destined to be a poet, to continue that.
That's really true, Daniel. Yeah, my family, I was like, my mom would be so mad if I said that. But there was a lot of storytelling, and that probably was like the earliest look I had. And those people were me. They were of my people, and that is really important, and probably the first step toward being a writer, I think, is like listening to what's around you. That's so true.
That's a great point. So you've all begun to touch on this issue already, and the title of this discussion tonight is Black Representation in Children's Literature. And so Jennifer Mack Watkins' exhibit, Children of the Sun, in Jennifer's words, she says it celebrates the beauty, importance, and complexity of positive representation of African American children. So I'd love to hear a little more, if you care to share your thoughts on the state of Black representation in children's literature today, and maybe your perspective on how that's changed over time. And also if that is something you really are thinking, that's in the forefront of your mind when you're doing your own work and thinking about that issue as well. Javaka, why don't we start with you this time?
Okay. I think about sneakers. And the reason why I think about sneakers is when I was young, we had Pro Kids and Converse, and they basically all the sneakers looked the same. The only difference was the color and the logo. But now when you see sneakers, you see so many shapes, sizes, colors, so many different types of styles. And so in terms of growing up and seeing books that represented Black people, you had the we were victims of racism, we were victims of the ghetto, and you had other certain types of books, but there was really no room for us to maneuver and be full people, So right now, what I see is a lot of people telling lots of different stories and being allowed to tell these stories, because it's not like the stories weren't there. It's just that we weren't allowed to speak these stories, because speaking these stories would give other people like us power, and that's still something that we're fighting for today is power. Another thing that I want to say is that in terms of mainstream publishing, because it's not a situation where Black people didn't publish their own books and create their own literature until like the 60s or the 70s, when Black children's books started to become mainstream. We also have to not just look at Black people writing books and illustrating books, or people of color, Black and brown people writing and illustrating books. We also have to talk about the publishing. Who's behind the scenes in the publishing, who's behind the scenes in education, because a great amount of books are being sold to educational institutions, to be in school libraries, to be in curriculars and things like that. And we also have to just think about, in general, the education of America, because I just think about how how states are allowed to create their own version of history. Mm-hmm. And so you are allowed to create your version of slavery, create your version of Jim Crow, create your version of whatever. And what that does is it has people doing crazy things like storming the Capitol building. So yeah, I think the numbers are around, and this is not Black children's books, but children's books about people of color. Right now, we're about maybe like 4 or 5% of the market of things that are published each year, but we're 50% of the population. So there's a lot more growing for us to be doing.
That's really, I really appreciate that perspective, that context. Thank you. Rio, Daniel, how about your thoughts about Black representation in children's literature, historically, today, in your own work?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rio.
Oh, well, I think it's think two things. I think it's changing sort of radically. It's still all this work to be done, like Javaka is saying, but I just think, and there are books that existed that I wasn't aware of when I was a child that were by Black illustrators and writers. And, you know, like Ashley Bryan, I was just recently reading to my daughter who's publishing. That could have been it could have been a book I was reading. Unfortunately, it wasn't. But I look around and I see an interest. I work in publishing. And so I feel like I've worked in publishing for about 10 years off and on. And it has felt different to me more acutely this last 12 months than it has over the arc of my career. I think my concern is sustainability. You know, I keep listening for words like saturation, you know, these sort of like trigger words that say to me like, okay, we're done acquiring this. Like we gave it a shot and we're going to go back to what we're used to doing. But I would say I've seen Black artists and writers able to advocate for themselves in new ways. I'd say, for example, I want to work with a Black illustrator for this book and have that happen. And I feel like those things, those conversations are changing. They're still not anywhere close to where they need to be, but I have felt a little bit of a change. And also saying like, it's important to me to work with a Black editor, or it's important to me to work with an imprint that represents diverse voices, you know, to be able to have that type of advocacy and make those types of decisions and be intentional has felt different on the publishing side for me. I don't know what it's felt like as a visual artist, but that's kind of what I've been seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, I can see a lot of changes in the industry, but I still feel that, you know, that it still feels limiting to me as far as the types of books that I do, that I'm asked to do. I really enjoy. I mean, I'm an illustrator. I enjoy illustrating all manner of things, you know. The characters in my books, they are generally going to be Black characters, because that's my perspective. But I would like to have more range, you know, of stories, you know, a much wider range of stories. I really like nature. I like insects. I like machines. I like, you know, science fiction. I love all of these things, you know, and fantasy, you know, and surrealism, and, you know, and nonsense. You know, I love all of these things, you know, and I like to put these things in my artwork. But I don't think there's a you know, but the publishers don't really seem interested in that type of work coming from us. So in that respect, I feel like is still in its infancy as far as recognizing the stories that we have to tell. I mean, because we do have a lot more nuance to the stories that we have. And also you look at the industry, and it is normalized as white, whereas the world that is not the world, and it is an illusion to continue to publish books only from that perspective, and thinking that you are publishing books with white people in them for white people. You should be publishing books about people in the world. And there's an organization called Diverse Book Finder, founded by Dr. Krista Aronson. you know, that looks at the book, all of the books published, and divides them into categories of, you know, what types of characters are in the books. What are they white and animal characters, or are they do they have a non-white person in them? Is that, and also, is that non-white person is it a positive image of that person, or is that person a main part of the story, or is that person just in the background, or is that, you know, are there female characters in the book? You know, are there people with disabilities in the book? And are they main characters? Are they part of the story? Do they move the story along? So it's looking at, Diverse Book Finder is looking at the books that are being published in a really deep and systematic way to understand, you know, why we are not seeing more books that represent more aspects of the people in the community, in the world community.
And that's called Diverse Book Finder?
Diversebookfinder.org.
Okay, thank you for that. I will definitely check that out. What I think I hear all of you saying is that while there's probably been a fair amount of progress over the decades, there's still a significant continuing need for more Black voices in children's literature and stories and positive representations, but also it sounds like for Black creators not to be pigeonholed into only writing or illustrating stories about Black people, but it sounds like all of that is still needed. Is that a fair characterization of what you're saying?
Absolutely. And I would also just bring up another thing. And I'm not going to name the book, but this is more so a behind the scenes thing. The marketing budget. Like, let some people of color have a bigger share of that marketing budget. Because, and I'll say this, there are situations where you have non-people of color creating stories about people of color, and those stories are being pushed, and those books are making millions of dollars. And then when you have people of color making books about people of color, they're not getting publicity.
Yeah, I can think of several books like that that find this wider audience, because in the imagination of a publisher, they're like, okay, here's a marginalized story, but it feels, you know, we're making it safe for us because it's told by a white person. So yeah, and then it's completely different when that story is, you know, there's a lot of conversation around the term own voices, but when it is that, they're like, okay, this is for this group of people, as opposed to like, this is a story that everybody ought to be reading. And so I agree, Javaka, the way that before a book even enters the world, there are certain factors that are sort of predetermining the wideness of its readership. And I think that there's not enough resources going into books by Black creators to begin with. The limited amount of books that that exist and that are planned and that are being published, those have limitations in terms of marketing and publicity, for sure.
I really appreciate hearing all of this. This is, you know, this is all news to me. This is not the realm that I'm familiar with. And in thinking about this question about Black representation in children's literature, I did not expect that we would be talking so much about the industry of children's literature, but obviously we have to be talking about that. And I really appreciate your thoughts and responses on this. Anything else on that subject before I move on to the next question, which is going to have a little more to do with history and incorporating history into your work.
Mhm.
Oh, fun.
Okay. So in preparing for this conversation tonight and familiarizing myself with each of you and your work, I definitely got the sense that engaging with history is an important part of what you do, just like it is for Jennifer Mack Watkins. In fact, I found in various interviews and things that you've given 3 short quotes, one from each of you, that speak to this issue. And so what I thought I'd do is just read them. Each one is very short. I'll read them all 3 of them, and then ask you all either to elaborate, respond to your own quote or to each other's, or say more about your thoughts about why and how history works its way into your work. So Rio, you said, my hope is that young readers feel curiosity and pride when they read this book. You were referring to the ABCs of Black History, which is a book I wrote for my daughter and for myself as a young reader, thinking about all of the incredible Black history moments that I missed out on in the classroom. I hope it's a launch pad and a spark. Black history is so crucial to understanding the world around us right now. We are our history, as James Baldwin says. So that's a quote from Rio. And now, Javaka, you were quoted saying, I've been trying to create books that don't show the normal story that's told about African Americans, but the exceptional story or a really interesting story. And that seems to me to be a comment having to do with thoughts about history in your storytelling. And finally, Daniel, in speaking about your work, you've said, I try to illuminate different connections that are found throughout the diaspora, connections to family, connections to land, and connections to the rituals that ground us and remind us of who we are and where we came from. So, Rio, how about this matter of dealing with history? But each of you jump in and feel free to respond. Can you tell us more about that, about the importance of history in your work and how you think about it and try to deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, this book specifically that I wrote is all about Black history. And I think I realized throughout my life as an adult, and especially, I mean, I had the opportunity to be around incredible archives and stories of Black history at the Schomburg Center. And that's the place I was when I wrote this book. And so for me, I thought a lot about what, the question I was wondering if for myself was, would that have made a difference in my own life? Had I had a foundation of better understanding of what sort of our stories in Black history that I wasn't aware of as a child, what would that have done differently for me? So that was a question I was asking myself when I wrote the book. I don't think everything I'll write will be about history. I think I really appreciated what Daniel was saying about liking, nonsense and science fiction and these things. I think it's important to see like a full spectrum of Blackness and not just focus on moments in history, which I think is something that can happen a lot in children's literature and publishing that we're talking about. But in this specific book, I wanted to talk about folks in history that were intersectional too. So there are queer Black people, legendary Black figures in this picture book that I didn't get to see when I was younger too. Women, queerness, people who had different stories with ability. And so I think that was something that was really important to me also. Yeah.
I think that one of the reasons you see a lot of history in children's books, in Black children's books, is relates to something that that Javaka said in talking about the way that books are sold. Well, the way that books are sold to schools as a part of a curriculum. Well, our history is not part of that curriculum. Generally it's not part. And so you see, we will a lot of times insert history into children's books as self-defense, as a way of getting some history in there, because the school system is not going to, they're not including that in the curriculum. And so that you're not seeing it in textbooks. So you're trying to teach your children history through the children's, through children's books instead of through school. It's not the best way of doing it, but it's kind of like it's the only way to record some of these stories, so that's one perspective I have on why there are a lot of there's a lot of history within in our Black children's books.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
One of the things that this conversation, or this particular part of the conversation we're having now, makes me think of is just like how contained history is. So like there's only one Michael Jordan, there's only one Sugar Ray Robinson, but like how many kids could be the kid with the purple crayon?
Mm-hmm.
And so like and maybe I'm just thinking too deep, but like when you create situations of scarcity, like there was only this one person and you're probably not going to be the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Does that stop kids from inspiring to be that, or maybe it's just safer, for a publisher to say, okay, we know how this story began and ended, and like there's nothing else within the story that we can find distasteful or whatever. And then I also think of just like the argument between fine art and craft, right? So a fine artist is a fine artist because they're intellectual, they could think, they are above the riffraff, right? So I'm not going to make utilitarian objects, I'm going to make things that people have to think about. But you who are not supposed to think, you have to make forks, you have to make tables. And so when you have children in books that are about imagination, like what does that do to a child's imagination? Because they are not one in a million. They are not, it's just anybody could be, a child with an imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll just respond too by saying I think there is something to that safety of publishing books about history. You can sort of like, it's one thing to crystallize Blackness in amber, and put it on a shelf, and it's another to have a living, breathing Black child who is creative and imaginative and deserving of those tools too. And it's harder to talk to that person, than it is to say, here's the story of something from the past. And it has like a bookend, so yeah.
I come from a Jewish family, and a lot of Jewish storytelling and a lot of Jewish history and revolves around the Holocaust and around surviving that and persisting. And I, of course, understand the importance of that. But as a kid and continuing on in my adult life, I kind of like have this, like I'm 2 generations removed from my ancestors who survived the Holocaust or didn't survive the Holocaust. And I feel like I wish that weren't always near the top of the things that we're talking about when we're talking about what it is to be Jewish, is, that we, either survived the Holocaust or didn't survive the Holocaust. And I wonder if there's an analogous feeling for you all with elements of Black history. Like, it sounds to me like there is, and like some of what I hear between the lines, what you're saying, it's like the stories have to not just be limited to that retelling of the what we've overcome or what we still are struggling to overcome. But like we need to have access to the full spectrum of life as human beings and tell those stories as well and live those lives as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. It's like there are some comparisons, but I also know that if that I get tired of hearing about it. I get the tragedies of our history, and with the Holocaust, I know that you get tired of hearing about it, but you better not forget it, because I know that I know you all you had to do was January 6th to look and see that there are people just waiting, for you to forget. So you don't have, I think it should not be forgotten, but I think that there is a lot more stories that we have to tell. But I would not dare. I wish I didn't have to talk about it. I wish we didn't have to, but we do. It's necessary. I see it as self-defense in a way.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's a balance between the need to remember, but also the need not to let that be the entirety of what defines the person.
And I would also add to that, to a certain extent, we're asking permission for us to tell our stories.
Yeah.
And so to me, like, that's probably the biggest offense, because it's not that this history can be uncomfortable. It's, you can tell this story and only this story. And then it's also, you could tell this story like this and only like this.
Only like this.
So are we really telling our stories, or are we just conforming for survival?
And who are you asking permission from?
Well, if we want to be published by a major publisher, if we want our film to be produced by a major producer, seen across the country and internationally, in theaters, if we want it to be syndicated on TV or any video streaming platforms, we're asking their permission until we have ownership in these platforms in an international way.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting about the Brownies, like the 100th anniversary of the Brownies publication, right? Since that was like a Black owned, Black operated, there wasn't that third dimension that you're talking about there, about permission, that was it.
So, and Rio, just for those who may not know, what you're referring to is that short-lived publication in 1920-21 that was, I think, founded and then edited by W.E.B. Du Bois and a few other people. That was called the Brownies Book, and it was a monthly magazine specifically with the explicit intention of conveying positive representations of African Americans to African American children. And that was part of what inspired Jennifer's exhibit at the museum, and this is the 100th anniversary of the Brownies Book. to me, part of what's incredible about it, and I think the curator of Jennifer's exhibit speaks about this in his essay accompanying the exhibit, is that like this issue is not new. W.E.B. Du Bois was, working on this 100 years ago, and here we still are talking about the need for more progress in this area.
Mm-hmm.
Really interesting.
I've got a quick the museum with that exhibit. Why did you choose to exhibit the a children's book in the museum? Is it normal? Is it a standard practice that the Brattleboro Museum exhibits children's books, or was there a particular reason?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So the body of work that Jennifer has created, Children of the Sun, Jennifer has created a catalog, but the work was not created explicitly as a children's book. It's not like a narrative book. It's a collection of individual works. And that said, we have very many times in the past exhibited children original artwork from children's books. But in this case, why did we choose to exhibit Jennifer's work? Well, we have been feeling like we have not had enough voices of people of color curating exhibits at the museum, and the exhibits that we've been presenting have not often enough included stories reflecting the experiences of people of color. And so David Rios Ferreira is a curator based in New York who we invited to curate in this gallery. And then we really left it to David to decide what he thought would be appropriate to show. And he knew Jennifer and knew her work and proposed that. And we thought that would be wonderful. And the way it evolved, where Jennifer took inspiration specifically from a really important story of a pioneering African-American activist and storyteller in Vermont, really made it tie in so strongly with our heritage locally in Vermont. And so that's some of the thinking behind why we.
I just felt like it's a bold move for a museum. And thank you for showing it.
Oh yeah, well, thank you for saying that. And our intention is just to do more of that and be bold and expand the range of voices and stories that we're able to share with our community and beyond. That feels really important. It feels like something really, really worthwhile to be doing. So I really thank you for asking that and saying that. So as you all know, I had a few more questions queued up, but I would like to ask our audience, if they're so inclined, to share comments or thoughts or questions, to begin doing so at this time. And you can do that in the Q&A. And I see we have one question that's already typed into the Q&A, and I'm going to get to those momentarily. But what I would love, if each of you wouldn't mind, before we get to audience Q&A, is if you would just give us a sneak preview of what's coming up for each of you, like what's happening in your studio, what's on the easel, what should we be watching out for? A little inside scoop, if you're willing to share that, because I think, speaking for myself, and I'm sure it's the case for many of the people in the audience as well now, if we didn't know your work before, we certainly plan on following you now. And so what's happening? What's coming up for you? Javaka,
I
feel like we're all at that. If I tell you, we might have to kill you.
Okay.
We're right there.
Okay. I
yeah.
hope it's a children's book involving sneakers, if you haven't done that already.
I didn't think of that. I'm working on my debut poetry collection for Penguin. It's called Golden Axe. It's out next year. And a picture book with Deneen Milner Books. It's not about history. It's about seeing Yemaya, the Orisha, in the Hudson River. So that's what's
cool.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Great. Amazing. I have a book about the color blue.
Oh, nice.
Awesome.
Yes, about the color blue. Yes.
Have you written this book as well, Daniel, or
No, I did not write it. I'm not a writer. Yes, so I haven't written this book.
Is this a children's book?
It's a children's book, yes.
Cool.
Having seen just a little bit of your artwork, and not in person, but only on your beautiful website, and some of the blue that is in some of the work on your website, I just have images in my mind of some gorgeous artwork. I can't wait to see that come to fruition.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for sharing that with us. I'm gonna get into the questions here from the audience, and we also have a real treat and honor and privilege in that Jennifer Mack Watkins is in the audience here tonight and is actually able to join us on screen and be part of the conversation if she would like to, and if she's not off in another room taking care of her kids right now, which may very well be the case, and that would be okay. Jennifer, there you are. So nice to see you. There we go. Thank you, Jennifer, for being the motivation for us all to get together here, not only tonight, but the other events we've been having and conversations in connection with your exhibit. Thank you so much.
Thank everybody for being here. I was really enjoying listening. I like just attending the event. Like I've been doing so much to promote, everyone that's here and promoting the show and like planning out all the programs. And I got, children at the door, waiting to come in, and they will come in later. But like, I just really enjoy just the conversation and just like, hope that we can help to like continue to like push the importance of diversity of books and just getting other publishers to think about like who are we always asking to do these books and who else can tell their story. So I think it's really motivating to think about how we need to continue to make this push. I didn't even think about like the way that y'all talking about it, like talking about like the school districts and the curriculum. Like it starts off more than just the book illustration, but we had to think about all different ways of how we can continue to like show the importance of it. And y'all are doing all that in your work. So I just want to continue to like tell you like you're doing amazing work. We need your voices. We need more voices, and hopefully this conversation will encourage other people to understand how important it is to support what you do as illustrators and artists. And I'm happy to be here.
Thank you,
Jennifer.
Need your work.
I'm gonna work through a few questions that have come into the Q&A. Thank you, those of you who have jumped in, and others, please feel free. I'm going to start with Catherine, who writes, when little, my mother read a book to me called Little Black Sambo. I have fond memories of that book. Because I'm thinking of introducing it to my granddaughter, I wonder if our speakers are familiar with it and what their thoughts are about the book. Because she's growing up in mostly white, very rural Vermont, my hope is to expose my granddaughter to a wide range of diverse characters and cultures. So I would also be grateful for recommendations. What an open and really great question and invitation for, and request for learning. Catherine, thank you. Really appreciate that and love to hear what our panelists have to say. Daniel, your eyebrows raised when you heard. What
Yeah,
Catherine said
you know,
about
it's
Wicked.
just that I remember that book too. And I think it's good to be aware of its existence. But as far as it having anything to teach you about Black culture or anything, I don't think that there's anything there. I don't think that there ever was anything there. It's the most basic that you can you can have. It's like it's like the gruel that they feed you in prison in a dungeon in a way, or just bread and water. That's all it is. I don't if yeah
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Javaka?
I think in terms of ways about finding out about good quality books, you can always Google, because there's like, I get lists like every week, every month of, the 100 best children's books about Black people, 100 best children's book about people of color. So you could just simply do that. Then there's also lots of different awards, like the Coretta Scott King Award, the Bell Prey Award. I forgot the
Pura Belpre.
Pure Bell Prey. So there's awards that are specifically geared towards certain subjects, not just Black or Hispanic or people of color. There's also awards that deal with people with disabilities and people, that are LGBT, whatever it is that you're looking for. I think the basic thing is to just Google, the best children's books about Black folks 2021. You'll get a great a list that will be so much better than Little Black Sambo. And I'll put it to you this way. It might be considered offensive for you to pull out Little Black Sambo when we have so many books that are beautiful, that are written by Black people, that talk about Black experiences from a Black person's viewpoint, that have so much more love. And so, like,
yes,
think about love when you're thinking about these books. And also, it's not just going to help Black people for your children to have these books. What's going to happen is, if you give your child the wrong book, they're going to be confused. And then they're going to go out into the world and say, this is not the way it was portrayed to me in this book. This is unfair. This is, not right. They're going to be confused. And a lot of times confusion brings anger. So think about love. It's better to give your grandchild something that was made in love, so that when he goes out or she goes out into the universe, they bring that love with them.
Well said. I also think if you're in a predominantly white area, you definitely want your grandchild to be exposed to other books about Black children than that. For sure. But your librarians are a great place to start. You should go to your local library, and there are so many specialists and librarians will be able to lead you in the right direction, I feel like.
Diversebookfinder.org.
Our wonderful librarian
so many places
in Brattleboro has weighed in here in the comments as well. So we're going to hear what Star has to say in just a moment. I just want to reiterate my my gratitude to Catherine for asking the question, because we grow up how we grow up, and we have our fond memories from childhood with that, like, they take root deeply with us, and then the world changes around us, and sometimes it's hard for us to catch up. And I really appreciate Catherine asking for recommendations and asking for what do you think about that, and what would you recommend? And I very much appreciate all of your responses as well.
And can I just even add to that? Nothing will happen between cultures, between people, if you don't ask a question, and you don't ask a question with earnest and honesty. And with that said, you also have to be open to the answer. And from my perspective, like I feel the same as you. The question was asked, and so if I don't answer it in love, then what I do is just create more bad feelings.
Absolutely.
But there's absolutely a wealth of books about people of color that reflect how people of color think about themselves, and that's really the thing that makes Little Black Sambo not the place to go, because it's not a reflection of a Black person saying, this is who I am, or this is what my community is.
I thank you so much, Javaka, for elaborating, for those words. I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said. I feel like this right here, this is maybe in a small way, how we make the world a better place, right? We ask open and honest questions, and we give open and honest answers, and we listen, and we change. And Catherine writes, I sincerely appreciate the honesty and feedback. So thank you all. I'm gonna move on because we have a lot in the Q&A right now. And are you guys all okay spending a few more minutes on questions?
Keep it going. Keep it coming.
Okay, good. Wynn writes, what can we as the community do to demand more representation in the market? Letters to publishers, social media campaigns, requests to school districts for acquiring more books for students. How can we help?
All of the above.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and buy the books that are by that's really, I feel like that speaks very, very much to publishers. But writing into your school districts, that's a great idea too. You get those adoptions, those book adoptions that really help a book survive live a long life and not go to print.
And ask your booksellers for them. Ask the booksellers, why don't they have more of these types of books? Because a lot of them think that, just because nobody's coming in to buy those books, that they don't need to stock them. And they may think that, oh, since there aren't a lot of Black people in the neighborhood, We don't need any books about Black children, but everybody needs to be reading these books. There are a lot of books about that have indigenous characters in them. That ask for these types of books from your booksellers. They need to know.
Yeah, I just think like last thing you said, books with indigenous characters in it. If you live in the state of Nebraska, which is an indigenous word. If you live in any state that has an indigenous town, a name for a town or a city or whatever, why wouldn't you have a book about an indigenous person? I guess another thought, just going back to the specific question, it's really important to buy the books. So you can't just say, you need more. You can't just go to a bookstore and say you need more books about people of color. You actually have to buy them. And the person asking, I'm being a little pushy when I say this, but you could actually buy them, and you can either donate them, or you can read them to your children, or you can read them to other people's children. And the thing is like, so, and I'm saying this in this way just because it's funny, and not to like dog out anybody, but there's a joke that goes on in the children's book world where a person of color says, no, a librarian or a teacher or something, and this is also nothing against librarians and teachers, because I love librarians and teachers, right? Y'all are the people that buy most of my books, but please just forgive me. So let's say a teacher says, I really love your books, how they speak about your experience, but we don't have any people of color in our schools, so we don't stock them. And then the writer or the illustrator goes, well, how many werewolves do you have in your school? How many witches do you have in your school? You have books about witches and werewolves.
Yeah.
So
sure. Yeah. Well, not to mention the fact that wherever you live and however homogenous your population might be, you're also situated within a wider world that has a lot of other types of people living in it and still doesn't have werewolves and witches.
Right.
On this same fantastic question and point about what can be done, what should we do, the director of the Brooks Memorial Library in Brattleboro, Starr, writes, buying a book is a political act. And I think seconding what you're saying about buy the books that you believe in and that will, help bring about the change that you want to see. Starr also writes, Julius Lester wrote a wonderful book called Sam and the Tigers, which was illustrated by Jerry Pinkney. That would be a better choice than Little Black Sambo.
Yeah.
And she writes, for good book choices, check with your local librarians. We need diverse books. And I think Starr is saying that there's an organization called We Need Diverse Books.
Yeah.
And she says, and our local independent bookstore in Brattleboro has an excellent selection of books with diverse characters. That's great. And then that Starr would be referring to a bookstore called Everyone's Books in Brattleboro. And Starr writes, thank you for your beautiful work, all of you, and for generously sharing your thoughts with us this evening. I'm grateful for the gift. And thank you, Starr, for being here and for participating in the conversation. We have a couple other questions. If you're all willing to take just a few more minutes, is that you're still on board with that?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Beth asks, how can teachers do your books justice through their teaching? Do you have any hopes or dreams of how they're being shared with students? What would you say to a class hearing your book for the first time?
Oh, I could, or should I just shut up? Because I feel like I'm saying a lot. Okay, so the one great thing about the pandemic is that a lot of people are doing virtual visits, right? So instead of spending thousands of dollars to have author or illustrator come to your school, you could get them in your school for a couple $100s. So there's a great thing that happens when you're actually able to talk to the person who actually wrote the words or painted or illustrated the book in whatever way. So that's just one way you could bring a story to life and give it a lot more dimension and depth. And then I think another thing that Star mentioned is that you're looking for great stories, right? You're not looking to create a symbol like here, this book was done by a Black person. You want a great story. You want a story that engages your audience. So you have to look for books that have some dimension of relation to your audience. You know, like it doesn't matter what culture you're from. Everybody has babysat someone, right? So if you can find something within your community that connects with the book that you buy from another culture, then you know you're creating these bridges.
Yeah, it's very true. I've been doing a lot of virtual classroom visits actually, and I grew up in Utah, Salt Lake City, Utah, not known for having a bustling Black community, but my family is one of the original pioneers to settle after Reconstruction in the state of Utah. And I recently did a classroom visit for the ABCs of Black History to an all-white classroom in Utah. And I thought this might be challenging. It was the first time, it was important to me because I had grown up there. And I had often and almost always, I'd always been the one Black child in those classrooms. And I had thought, like, if there's one Black child in this classroom, I'm gonna do this event and this is gonna just like really speak to that child. But when I did the event, there were no Black children in the classroom. And I still felt really happy to have presented the book and the material, because why shouldn't this classroom in Sandy, Utah be learning about Black history and be just as excited about and inspired by Black history as I might have been in that very classroom? And so I think if you're asking if you're a teacher who's maybe not Black or not of the community of the book that you're teaching, and even your students don't reflect that community, I still got a lot of great questions from those students. They still felt really engaged. They still wrote their own sort of like, they had their own exercises based on the book that the teacher provided. And it was a good day of learning for them, I think, to think about something that maybe was outside of their perspective. And so, yeah, you can do it. And there doesn't even necessarily, I mean, you're people, there doesn't necessarily even need to be, I think, a thread, you know, there didn't need to be that one Black child for that to be a productive day for them to think about Blackness.
Great point. Yeah, thank you for sharing that experience. Katie writes, Ty Allen Jackson is a great example of a Black author who does school visits, including virtual ones. Ty Allen Jackson. And he's local to our community in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts. Thank you, Katie. Katie also wrote earlier, referring to another question that had been submitted, but I'm not sure which one. She wrote, it was a good question. We have to take responsibility for old TV shows and movies that are not appropriate anymore, never were really. So I think that maybe had to do with the Little Black Sambo discussion. And finally, just have a couple final comments here from Wynn, who also was responding when we were talking about Little Black Sambo and reiterating the notion of how important it is to maybe not introduce Little Black Sambo, but other books, especially for a child who may not who may be growing up in an area where they don't have a lot of firsthand experience with people of color. And Wynn wrote, and I think this was in response to what you were saying, Javaka, about the importance of buying a book. Wynn wrote, I'm a seasoned adult who bought books for nieces and nephews and bought 2 copies, one for them, one for me. Mr. Steptoe, 2 of your books are on my shelf right now. Thank you, Wynn.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So those are all the comments and questions that we've gotten, and what a fantastic bunch of comments and questions. Thank you, everyone in the audience, so much. I think we're going to bring this to a close at this point. I'm going to ask Rio, Daniel, Javaka, if there are any final thoughts that you want to share with us. I absolutely want to give you a chance to do so. Also, don't feel like you're put on the spot. You don't have to. But next to last, I'm going to ask Jennifer if there's anything she would like to add or ask.
Sure. I have a question I thought I would want to ask everybody on the panel. So I thought, if you can make a book, whether it be written or illustrated, what would the front cover of a story about you, and what story would you choose, and what would the front cover be?
Oh, wow. That's impossible.
Wow.
Rio has an out because
that's really hard.
No, yeah, I'm not an artist, so I don't.
But I've always wanted to do a book about the inner space and outer space. So it would have something about that. I mean, something about being really small and something about being really large.
That's cool.
You
Love
see
that.
Sounds nice.
I think I would want mountains of some kind. I don't know how I would make sense of that, but I would want there to be a mountain.
Are there mountains in Utah? I don't know. I've never been. Like, what is
Oh,
Utah
yeah,
like?
for sure. If you're ever going through beautiful mountains, if nothing else.
It's your book, Rio.
Javaka?
You can have anything you want.
I want a mountain. Yeah. All right.
You got a mountain.
Space, mountain, Javaka, what you gonna have?
I think I might go with Daniel's answer a little bit. I definitely would like some outer space stuff happening. It makes me think of your work. Is it Prince?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Daniel?
it makes me think of one of the prints where you see the little boy's head and then the stars and then the moon in the background. I thought that was pretty cool. So you could just give me that.
Those are really cool.
Thank you.
Jennifer, thank you again. Thank you, Jennifer, for your work and for all your ideas around the programming that we've done in connection with your exhibit, including suggesting that we have a panel like this tonight and connecting the museum with Rio and Daniel and Javaka. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And Rio, Daniel, Javaka, this has been such a joy. I've enjoyed this tremendously, and I'm sure our audience has as well. I've become a great admirer of all 3 of you, and really look forward to becoming more familiar with your work, and hope that we'll have the opportunity for our paths to cross again in the future, and maybe we'll have the opportunity to show your work in our museum, or who knows what. But
Yes.
Thank you. This has been such a joy.
Well, it's been a pleasure, just sitting and hanging out with you guys, hanging out and getting to, just talk about, a lot of things that, that, we think about but don't often say, so it's been a pleasure. Good to hang with you, Javaka and Rio.
Likewise, yeah.
Yeah. Good meeting all of you and hanging with you too. And I might have to come to Brattleboro and see Jennifer's freaking
Please do. So this is included in my little commercials that I just have to make before we sign off, which is that Jennifer's exhibit, and we have 5 other exhibits up at the museum, and actually 2 more that are outdoor exhibits that we've just opened this week. So we have a lot going on, and the 6 exhibits indoors, or 5 exhibits indoors, are up through June 13th. That includes Jennifer's exhibit. The museum is open Wednesday through Sunday, 10 to 4. We would love to see you. That goes for those of you on the screen, but also everyone in the audience. Obviously, if you happen to be in our area or can be, and you're up for an in-person, non-screen based art experience, please come to the Brattleboro Museum. And if you do come, please let me know. I would love to say hi. And before we sign off, I just want to let our audience know that the museum is selling copies of Rio's and Daniel's and Javaka's books in our gift shop, which you can visit in person at the museum or online at our website, which is brattleboromuseum.org. You'll find a link to gift shop, and then you'll find a selection of books there. And everyone out there, I hope you'll consider joining us again next Wednesday evening, May 12th, for something completely different. The next event in our spring lineup of events is a talk by digital artist Ann Spalter on NFT art. And if you don't know what NFT stands for, or even if you do, well, join us next Wednesday, and we're all going to learn more about that. And then a week after that, on May 19th, we're very excited and honored to host a presentation by Vermonter Curtis Reed Jr., who's the founder of the Vermont African American Heritage Trail, which played an important role in the development of Jennifer's exhibit, Children of the Sun. So Curtis is going to be here speaking about that. That's Wednesday, May 19th. You can register for those free events and more at brattleboromuseum.org. I think that does it. Rio, Daniel, Javaka, Jennifer, all of you in the audience, thank you once again. Stay safe. Take good care of yourselves and each other. And hope to see you soon. Good night.
Thanks,
Good night,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
All right, good
Bye,
night.
everyone.
Good night.